starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to Funding Source Water Protection, part of the Source Water Collaborative Learning Exchange webinar series. I'm Marcella Hutchinson with the United States Environmental Protection Agency Region 8 office, and I will be your moderator today. We have over 90 people registered for this webinar today. Thank you all for your interest and for coming. Next slide, please. For those who are unfamiliar, the Source Water Collaborative is a group of 26 associations, federal agencies, and other organizations that work both together and individually with their constituents to help policymakers, planners, agricultural interests, developers, citizens groups, and others integrate source water protection into key decisions. Next slide, please. To celebrate our 10-year anniversary, the Source Water Collaborative has launched this new Learning Exchange. The Learning Exchange aims to strengthen the effectiveness of source water practitioners across the country by providing a platform to share experiences, transfer knowledge, and learn about funding and technical resources available to support their efforts. In order to share success stories that showcase projects and partnerships making a difference in communities across the country and how others may duplicate these successes, the Learning Exchange sponsors knowledge-sharing events such as webinars, brown bags, and virtual workshops and panels, opportunities to converse with peers through online networking forums and social media, shareable quotes, graphics, and tips to support your organization's operations and outreach efforts, technical and educational materials recommended to peers by collaborative member organizations and Learning Exchange participants. Next slide, please. From August to December of 2016, the Learning Exchange will offer organized events, communications, and resources by theme. We are carrying over October's theme of Funding Source Water Protection for today's webinar. Next slide, please. In today's webinar, these source water protection leaders will discuss their experiences with source water protection investments and share tips on using drinking water state revolving fund set-asides for source water protection, leveraging funding sources and partnerships for multiple gains, and public-private partnerships. Next slide, please. Our presenters today are Kiri Anderer, an environmental engineer on the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund team at EPA headquarters. She will discuss the new eligibilities for Drinking Water State Revolving Fund and how they may relate to source water protection. Next, we will hear from Les Perkins speaking about leveraging resources and partners to meet both irrigation and source water protection needs in the Farmers Irrigation District in the Hood Valley of Oregon. Unfortunately, Jerry Bryan will be unable to join us today. Les Perkins is the manager of the Farmers Irrigation District, which serves nearly 6,000 acres of farmland in the Hood River Valley. Les is also a Hood River County Commissioner. Finally, we will hear from Kelly Anderson and Tim Fenchel speaking about the Schuylkill River Restoration Fund, a public-private partnership. Kelly Anderson is the program manager of the Source Water Protection Program at the Philadelphia Water Department, which focuses on actively managing and coordinating programs to protect the Schuylkill and Delaware Rivers, sources of Philadelphia's drinking water supply. Tim Fenchel is the acting executive director of the Schuylkill River Heritage Area and manages 3 grant programs, including the Schuylkill River Restoration Fund. Next slide, please. Before we start our panel, there's a bit of housekeeping to do. We value your questions and ask that you type them into the question box on your webinar control panel, which is not to be confused with the chat box. We will not be taking verbal questions during this webinar. I will collect the questions and present them to speakers after all presenters are finished. You may enter your questions into the question box at any time and are encouraged to enter them during presentations if you wish to do so. If your question is for a specific speaker or speakers, please include that in your question. Next slide, please. There is more to the Learning Exchange than webinars. Please visit the Source Water Collaborative's Learning Exchange webpage to find more tools and testimonials to help you get started finding the right partners and funding options for your projects. Learning Exchange resources and events are available to all interested groups, and you are encouraged to participate and contribute in ways that suit you and your organization's interests. Here you can see for this month's theme of Funding Source Water Protection, the Source Water Collaborative has posted a variety of resources from its member and other organizations on its webpage, developed sample tweets for sharing information through social media, developed this document on key funding resources and featured case studies where multiple funding sources were leveraged to finance source water protection initiatives. This webinar should be available for viewing on the Learning Exchange website in about a week. And now, without further ado, our first speaker today will be Kiri Anderer with the United States Environmental Protection Agency, speaking about the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. Take it away, Kiri.
All right, thank you, Marcella, and thank you for inviting me to join you today to talk a little bit about the DWSRF. So first, I thought I would start with just a little bit of background, because I'm not sure if everyone listening in is familiar with the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. It basically was created back in 1996 with the Safe Drinking Water Act amendments, and it's modeled after its very successful sister program, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which deals with a lot of wastewater and other non-point source type projects. It's a state and federal partnership that's designed to create a perpetual source of financing for drinking water infrastructure. Congress continues to provide annual appropriations to capitalize the program, but it is primarily a loan program. So once projects are completed and start repaying the money, that money then goes back to the state, so the state can then in turn loan it out to other communities, hence the revolving nature and the revolving in the name. There's 3 priorities listed here. These are statutory priorities for the program, so just wanted to kind of set the framework. That first and foremost, we are a public health protection program. Financing is just the mechanism of how we achieve this then. So you'll see that compliance and human health are some of the priorities, and then also affordability is another one of the ways that states prioritize projects. So the amendments created a tapestry of quite a few different interrelated elements. States are allowed to take some money off the top of this. Sorry, let's add the logo there. States are allowed to take funding off the top of their annual allotments, which we call set-asides. And they can provide other forms of assistance that enhance public health protection. So you'll see here in the diagram, the parts that are in blue are the things funded by the loan or the project side of the fund. And then the parts in yellow are what people can fund through the set-aside portion of the funds. So the states have to really balance how much money they kind of take for each side of the program, whether it's the loan fund or the set-asides. And so this here is just showing, that balance that states have to consider. So if the question is, if you get that one more dollar, where's the highest value? So as I mentioned, they're allowed to take set-asides off the top. They can take up to 31% of their capitalization grants in the form of set-asides to help fund state programs and support water system actions that enhance sustainability. So states craft their own programs. They determine how much set-asides to take and which ones to take. There's 4 different set-asides, which I'll talk about in a minute. And so since 1997, the beginning of the program, states have taken approximately 16% of their capitalization grants. So they're not fully maximizing that 31% that they're allowed to take. Some states do, but not all states do. This box shows the 4 different types of set-asides that folks can take. So there's a small system, 2% set-aside. There's an administration 4% set-aside that a lot of states do take to run the SRF program. The other 2 set-asides then we call the state program management set-aside, or the 10% set-aside, and that's for public water system supervision and related programs. And then the 4th one is the local assistance and other state programs. We also call it the 15% set-aside, which I'll go into a little bit more detail on both of those. The 10% and the 15% are the 2 areas where source water protection activities can be funded. So first, the 10%. These are just some of the, main activities that states can use to fund source water protection activities under the 10%. I know that the introduction said new eligibilities. I think a lot of these are things that states have always been able to do, but maybe some of these are new to you, and you're not aware of things that you're able to do. So, for example, a state can conduct a source water protection. States can provide technical assistance to help systems prevent contamination from drinking water sources. or fund their state personnel that are working in the source water protection arena. I do want to note here that the funding cannot be used to cover costs associated with the underground injection control enforcement actions. The 15% set aside is where I think a lot more folks might be used to or more familiar with how they can spend money on source water protection initiatives. These listed here are just some of the types of technical assistance activities that folks can take. I'll talk just a minute about the loans. The one I want to highlight here, I'm not going to read through all of them, but the last bullet I want to highlight because as you probably all know, HABs, the harmful algal blooms, have been in the news quite a bit lately. And so this is an area where maybe folks weren't aware that they could use their set-asides. We have at least one state right now who's actually doing this to do some monitoring for their systems to get a handle on when and where the algal blooms might be forming. I'll also note for this set-aside, for the 15%, only up to 10% can be for any one activity. So if you are doing source water protection activities with the 15%, only 10% of it could be used for that. So then the other 5% would have to be used for something else, like wellhead protection or capacity development. So I mentioned the set-asides can also be used to provide loans. This can support various source water protection activities related to local land use controls and management tools. Loans for land acquisition and conservation easements, loans for incentive-based source water protection measures, and partnership petition programs are available for community water systems and nonprofit non-community water systems if they're protecting the public health from contamination. So I want to note here too, if a state is going to provide loans through this set-aside, they actually have to create priority ranking systems similar to the loan portion of the DWSRF. So they have to have that be publicly available for people to see how they're ranking projects. These loans, similar to the loan program, have to be offered at or below market value, and they can be for loan terms up to 20 years. And then each loan must be secured by a dedicated source of repayment. And something also that folks might not be aware of, in recent years we've had requirements for states to give away, so to speak, a certain portion of their capitalization grant. We call it additional subsidy. So they can offer, for example, principal forgiveness on loans. And so they can do that with the set-aside loans as well. They could offer them as principal forgiveness as long as they're within the range that Congress has authorized each year. So for example, in the past, it's been between 20 and 30% of a state's capitalization grant has to be given as additional subsidization. So all of these things I just have been talking about will be in our eligibility handbook that we're working on. It's currently in draft form. We released a copy back in March, so hopefully some of you listening have seen it. We received comments and we've incorporated those comments. And we're working on, we've incorporated them all, and the final review is going on right now, and we hope to have it done by the end of the calendar year. So we really hope to have our final version out really soon, and I'm sure it will get out to you guys. I'll be sure to share it with the folks here in headquarters that are working on source water protection to distribute it. There's a couple examples on the screen. These are some of the examples we're highlighting in the eligibility handbook of how states have used their set-asides for source water protection activities. I thought I would just real quickly highlight just how much money has gone into some of these activities in the past. So I found it pretty interesting. We just received our compilation of FY16 data. So this is data as of June of 2016. And so for the 10% set aside, we found over the life of the program about $93 million have been spent on source water protection technical assistance. And then in the last 5 years, it's been about 18 million. So the peak was kind of in the early to mid 2000s. And then in the last 5 or so years, it's actually been pretty steady. Pretty steady amount has been going to that. There's about 24 states that are currently providing technical assistance. So then for the 15%, this is where I found some interesting things. As far as loans for source water protection land acquisition, only about $9 million has been provided to date, with $1.5 million of that in the last 5 years. There's only about 5 states that are doing this. And actually, it was only that $1.4 million was only in 1 of the last 5 years. As far as loans for incentive-based source water protection measures, in total it's been almost $8 million. The last 5 years there's actually been no spending. And so this was what caught my eye that I went back and looked. There's actually only 2 states that have done this in 1 year each. So this is actually one of the opportunities available for funding that people aren't using very much. And then as far as doing source water protection delineation and assessments, pretty much every state has used this, but just a few. And as you would expect, the funding peaked in the early 2000s and has been fairly steady ever since, though, at a much lower amount than was funded back in early 2000s. And so with that, that summarizes what I was going to cover. So if you have questions, I guess I don't know if we're going to get to those all at the end, so please let me know. And I just wanted to say thank you. I know everyone on this call has a vested interest in source water protection, so thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you, Kiri. Up next, we have Les Perkins, who will tell us about the Hood River and funding and partners for multiple benefits. Take it away, Les.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Can you hear? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, we hear you.
I was having issues with my computer and my audio. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how we've used the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund over the years in our irrigation district. I know many of you are probably in areas where irrigation is not common. In the West, pretty much all agriculture is using some form of irrigation, usually surface water. So I'll tell you a little bit about our organization. We are a special district. It's basically a quasi-municipal corporation, so somewhat like a city, but a little bit different. We're governed by an elected board of directors. We have about a little under 2,000 patrons in our system, cover about 6,000 acres of ag land, and we've been around since 1874. Next. So we are in the Hood River Basin, which is in north central Oregon. We're a pretty small basin. We rely almost exclusively on surface water for irrigation and drinking water. We have very little groundwater use. Agriculture is our top sector of our local economy. It accounts for nearly $300 million to the local economy when you factor in all facets. We have had the lowest unemployment rate in the state for several years, so we're kind of a booming little agricultural area. Next. So this is looking up the valley. That's Mount Hood in the background. Mount Hood is the source of most of our water late in the irrigation season. It's a glacially fed system. Over 70% of the flow in our rivers late summer comes from glacial melt, so glaciers function as our biggest reservoirs. The Hood River Basin has about 25,000 acres of farmland, primarily growing pears, apples, cherries, blueberries, and wine grapes. They're pretty high dollar crops. As you can see, we have a pretty major elevation difference. We dropped from 11,235 feet down to nearly sea level in about 35 miles. Next. So within our basin, there's 3 major irrigation districts. We're kind of in the middle of the 2 in terms of size. We would be the green shaded area on the north end. Next. So we have a fairly complex system that delivers water to our end users. We're in really remote and rugged terrain, many miles. Our water intakes are many miles from our distribution system and our hydropower facilities. Next. We have 2 reservoirs in our system. They're relatively small, about 1,000 acre feet. In those reservoirs, we store winter flows for late summer use. Next. We also have many surface water diversions. So as with most of the West, we rely on live flow from streams. This is a picture of the Hood River as our main stem diversion. So none of our diversions have dams associated with them. We just bifurcate the flow and take a little bit off and into our system. It's a very high gradient system compared to many systems you might see in the U.S. Next. So the nature of that terrain can cause big problems for water-related infrastructure. Because it's a glacially fed system, they're inherently unstable. We get debris flows about every 10 years, and this is one from 2006 that in one 24-hour period brought down just massive amounts of sediment, rocks, and debris. So when you've got infrastructure for water use on the edge of these stream systems, they can take a beating. Next. So the crops that our water depends on can't go without water. So they're not crops that you can fallow. You don't change them year to year. They're typically tree fruit or other types of crops that you harvest from for 30 to 80 years. So lack of water in one season can create major damage to these crops that last for years. So reliability of water is crucial. Having the ability to survive major weather events and these catastrophic flows that we get, as well as droughts, is essential for our local economy and also for the hydro production within our irrigation system. And so that's just on the agricultural side. We also have major environmental challenges and needs to consider. So our district has seen major changes over the last 30 years due to massive investments in infrastructure, and that's where the CWSRF, Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund, comes in. Next. So back in 1986, this irrigation district invested in small-scale hydroelectric power, installed 2 hydroelectric facilities. And so I'm going to talk about a little bit about what our system was like before that, and then what's happened over the last 30 years and how that's relevant to the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund. So before 1986, we had 34 points of diversion. So that's 34 places that we took water out of streams. We had 70 miles of open canals that delivered the water to our system. We had 1,451 pumps on our system. We had no hydropower production. We had no fish screens. So a fish screen is it's basically a device that separates your flow from fish and debris. So it keeps fish in the streams and keeps them from going into an irrigation or hydropower system where they would die. Next. So some of the issues that we had in the early days, water reliability, water loss. So we would lose tremendous amounts of water in our canals. So some of these canals are 30 miles, 20, 30 miles long. And in those canals, you can lose 40 to 50% of your flow through seepage into the ground. So we had a hard time reliably delivering water to our irrigators and to ultimately to our hydropower facilities. We'd have canal failures. So those open canals are in steep terrain with lots of timber. So you have a windstorm, it could knock a tree into your canal, which blocks the flow, which then blows out the side of the canal and sends tons and tons of sediment down into rivers and streams, which in this basin have multiple endangered species, salmon and steelhead in particular. We have the highest number of endangered species in the state of Oregon. We had high operation maintenance costs. We had crews out maintaining our system 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We had a really hard time managing debris and sediment in our system. And we didn't have enough revenue to meet the needs of the district. Next. So infrastructure today. Just going to give you a quick peek at kind of how things have changed in the 30 years since we started investing in our system. So we now have 11 points of diversion. We have 11 fish screens installed. We've installed 68 miles of pipeline. We have only 2 miles of open canal remaining. We've installed a centralized pump facility, installed a centralized filtration facility. We have 2 sediment removal facilities and 2 hydropower facilities. Next. So a lot of our major savings in our system came from piping open ditches. So this is a typical ditch that we'd have in our system that conveys water to our end users. And as you can see, it's out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by timber. Next. By putting pipe in these ditches, it ensures that water is not lost through seepage, and we don't have canal failures, which, as I said, send massive amounts of sediment into streams. Next. So the fish screens that we have in today ensure that fish stay in the rivers and streams while keeping debris out of the system. Next. The on-farm application upgrades that our farmers have invested in decrease water use by as much as 60%. These types of irrigation application methods aren't possible if you don't have pressurized, clean water to deliver to your farmers. Next. So hydropower revenue gives us a steady revenue source with which to pay debt service. So we have 2 hydropower units in our system generating a maximum of 4.8 megawatts. It's about 26 million kilowatt hours a year. It's enough to power about 2,000 all-electric homes. So our district invested in, it's called in-conduit hydropower. It basically harnesses the power of the water flowing through your system before you deliver it to your farmers. So that hydropower revenue that we have been able to utilize has allowed us to invest in our system heavily, and it's meant more consistent and reliable flows ultimately. Next. So the results of the investments, this district's invested nearly $50 million in infrastructure in our district over the last 30 years. The results have been we've eliminated 23 points of diversion. So there's 23 places that we're not taking water out of a river or stream anymore. We've installed 11 fish screens. In each one of those instances, those screens can save tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of fish from being entrained or going into our system annually. Installed 68 miles of pipeline. As I said, we generate nearly 26 million kilowatt hours annually. We've eliminated 1,451 individual pumps on our system, which saves 1.45 million kilowatt hours annually. Next. This is a big one. We save 15,000 acre feet of water annually. That's almost 5 billion gallons annually, which is just a huge number. So it now takes us half as much water to deliver to our farms. So we would lose about half of that water in our conveyance, but by putting pipe in the ground, that now stays in the pipeline and is delivered directly to the farmers. So we need to take half as much water out of the stream to serve the same number of acres that we did 30 years ago. We've eliminated 2,288 tons of sediment from our rivers and streams, which would enter annually due to canal failures. We put 85,000 board feet of wood in streams, which helps to rebuild the stream system. We have 2 minimum in-stream flow agreements with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, guaranteeing that we leave a minimum amount of water in the stream late in the summer. We have about $500,000 in avoided O&M costs annually, and all of this has allowed us to invest over $50 million into our district. Next. So some of the additional benefits, and these are really important when you're looking at stream health. Decreasing the accumulation of nutrients and chemicals. So one of the things that happens when you close up open ditches that are conveying water through farmland is that you eliminate the opportunity for your ditch to act as a collection system for nutrients and chemicals. So when your water is pressurized and in a pipe, you just don't pick up those nutrients, and so you eliminate that conveyance of those nutrients and chemicals into the stream. Protection of nearly 6,000 acres of high-value farmland, which again has an important impact on our local economy. We've got improved on-farm economics, so farmers are spending less on getting water under their crops. They are decreasing their on-farm fertilizer and spray use because they're applying a more appropriate amount of water. Next. So funding sources. So how have we funded this $50 million in improvements? One is irrigation assessment. So our growers pay a fee per acre for the water that we deliver. That's about 1/3 of our revenue. Hydropower revenue is about 2/3 of our revenue. We have been able to attain grants, however, they're fairly limited. Loans are the primary way that we have been able to fund our infrastructure improvements. So we have currently about $20 million in debt, which requires us to pay about $1.6 million annually in debt service. And that, interestingly enough, nearly matches exactly what our hydropower revenue is. Next. So there are funding realities. When you look at irrigation districts, grants can only cover a small portion of the cost of the infrastructure needs. Most irrigation districts, their infrastructure is at least 100 years old, and it's aging and in need of some major investments. The per acre assessment on agricultural water users can't even come close to covering the costs of the needed upgrades in infrastructure. So you just can't. We charge about $110 per acre, which is a high cost compared to many parts of the state, and that's about as high as we can go and still have it be economical for the farmers. It's not nearly enough to cover the cost of the improvements to our infrastructure. So low interest loans are an essential way to accelerate those improvements, and by accelerating those improvements, you see benefit to the environment faster. Next. So we currently are utilizing DEQ funding, CWSRF funding. We're replacing 2 miles of old pipeline that was leaking and rusting out with high density polyethylene fused pipe. We are upgrading our controls in our power plants, which allows us to have higher efficiency with our plant and also to manage our water more efficiently. And we're expanding our reservoir. We're just about doubling the size of our reservoir, which allows us to take more winter water, store it, and leave more summertime water, summertime flow in the stream. And we're also upgrading our telemetry and SCADA systems so that we can have finer controls and better monitoring over our whole system. Next. So while this district has done a ton of work in the past, we still have quite a bit to do. We still have 2 miles of main canals pipe, which will cost us about $11 million. We've got a lot of work to do on farm efficiency. We've got other opportunities for additional power generation in our district. We want to increase our monitoring and really being able to prove that we're doing everything we say we're going to do in terms of stream flows. And we've always got water user education. Next. So that's it for me. Contact information is here, and I guess we'll be taking questions after everyone's done.
Yes, thank you, Les. And next up, we have Kelly Anderson and Tim Fenchel and the Schuylkill River. Please proceed. Kelly and Tim?
Kelly, are you there? I think you're first up here.
Can you hear me, Tim? This is Kelly.
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Hi, how is everybody doing today? And thank you for listening. I'd like to thank EPA Region 3 for reaching out to Tim and myself to give an overview of our regional coordination efforts in the Schuylkill River watershed. My presentation is going to be the beginning part of our two-part presentation here. I'm going to focus on what we're doing in Philadelphia, give an overview of our watershed and our source water protection program, speak to some of the coordination efforts that we've been tackling for the past 15 years, specifically to our restoration fund, our Schuylkill River Restoration Fund, which is our the mechanism that we use to fund projects in the watershed. So next slide, please. To give an overview of Philadelphia's watershed, you can see that the city of Philadelphia is located at the confluence of 2 heavily populated and industrialized rivers, the Schuylkill River and the Delaware River. This has necessitated PWG to take proactive steps towards being an industry and regional leader in source water protection. Our drinking water intakes are located at the bottom of 2 major watersheds, and Philadelphia's jurisdictional area covers less than 2% of the area influencing our water supply. There are thousands of point sources, influences from upstream development, non-point source impacts such as agriculture, historical water quality impacts from mining, and other factors that contribute to the water quality profile at Philadelphia's 3 drinking water intakes. The city of Philadelphia supplies approximately 1.7 million people with water every day. The Delaware River shares water resources between 4 states. Watershed management is political, and decisions impacting water quality and quantity are constantly being negotiated through our state and with our Delaware River Basin Commission. The Schuylkill River runs its course entirely within Pennsylvania, but also requires strategic partnerships between local, state, and federal agencies to achieve watershed management goals. Next. Throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, the Philadelphia River system, which includes the Delaware and the Schuylkill, helped advance our region as one of the largest industrial hubs in the nation. This also created a legacy of water quality challenges for the city of Philadelphia and the folks in our region to address later on. So with the inception of the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act and the amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act in 1996, we've been able to really tackle some of these legacy impacts that we were able to identify in our source water protection assessment. Philadelphia has a long history of being proactive and understanding the impacts that humans can pose on our water resources. This here is a screenshot of a report that was done in the late 1800s by the Philadelphia Water Department along the Schuylkill to understand what industrial activities and life activities upstream are happening and how those activities are influencing the water quality that we were seeing in Philadelphia. Next. To put our water supply into context, for those familiar, so the we rely on conventional treatment, and we have 3 drinking plants that use treatment as a means of cleaning up the water coming in from the rivers. The water comes from working rivers. Our intakes are located at the bottom of the watershed, and as I mentioned, we control less than 1% of the area of influence. To compare, to put that into context, like to New York City, New York City's water treatment and source water protection program, their water supply has no filtration. They have filtration avoidance. Those are undeveloped watersheds, so their water supply is pretty well protected, and source water protection is the only means of protection. Next. So for my presentation today, and because of the funding programs that we have happening with the heritage area, I'm going to focus on the Schuylkill watershed. The map here shows the breakdown of land use area and the influences from those land use areas that can present challenges to water suppliers along the Schuylkill. On the left, you can see that the upstream part of the watershed is forested, but we also have challenges that have been presented from legacy abandoned coal mining activities. And moving downstream, it's a very active agricultural area, so dealing with the challenges related to ag practices such as nutrient management, pathogens, sediment, ENS control. Moving down to the sections closer, as we get closer to the city of Philadelphia, there's stormwater challenges, as there is throughout our entire watershed system, but really with impervious surfaces and more development, dealing with the challenges that stormwater runoff can present to our drinking water supply and our rivers and streams. And that goes to say also in the city of Philadelphia itself, how do we handle and manage stormwater that is best protects our drinking water intakes. On the left-hand side, we have a map of the number of wastewater treatment plants that are located along the Schuylkill and throughout the watershed, and you can see that there are a number of point sources above our drinking water intakes that we as a city, we do not have direct control over these other systems. They're outside of our jurisdiction. And we realized that we really needed to create a means at working together in partnership with the EPA at Philadelphia's drinking water supply. Next. So back in the late 90s, early 2000s, PWD embarked on an intense effort to prioritize and identify impairments in the Schuylkill watershed. The Schuylkill watershed is comprised of 2,770 stream miles, and 35% of that was deemed to be impaired. Next. Back in the late 90s, around the same time that utilities were gearing up to address the amendments made to the 1996 versions of the Safe Drinking Water Act, PWD embarked on an effort to identify and prioritize the issues that were the water quality issues in the Schuylkill watershed. This included doing an assessment for the entire Schuylkill River watershed. We deemed our area of influence not just, the Zone A and Zone B. Our Zone C includes our entire watershed area. So it was very ambitious trying to tackle a 2,000 square mile watershed. After we completed our assessments, we did a protection plan for the Delaware and the Schuylkill River watersheds. And the approach here was to develop Philadelphia as a model for source water protection for upstream communities, create mechanisms for regional coordination across geographic, regulatory, and jurisdictional boundaries, and always use science to identify and advance policies that sustainably protect Philadelphia's water supply. Next. A result of the protection plan that we did identified the need for a watershed-wide organization that could transcend regulatory and jurisdictional boundaries and implement protection and restoration efforts in watershed. In 2003, the Schuylkill Action Network was founded by Philadelphia Water Department, EPA Region 3, Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, Delaware River Basin Commission, and the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary. The mission of the SAN is to improve water resources in the Schuylkill watershed. The SAN was split up into different work groups formed around addressing the issues that were identified within the source water assessment and laying out through the protection plan how these groups can work together to achieve water quality improvements in the watershed. Through the SAN, Philadelphia is able to support projects upstream to meet regulatory requirements and protect Philadelphia's drinking water source. I'll get into our regulatory requirements in a couple slides. Next. So this is an excerpt from a nice packet of information we put together back in 2013, where the SAN celebrated its 10-year anniversary, and this slide here states that over 500 projects have been accomplished in 10 years. I would say that we're probably ticking upwards towards 550 to almost 600 projects. We've had some private foundations invest some significant resources into the watershed in recent years, and we're seeing a number of projects, stormwater, ag, land conservation projects advancing at the present. So moving to the next slide. So this slide here is a ballpark of the investments that have been made in the Schuylkill, and this includes back in the early 2000s, around the time the SAN was created, we received, Philadelphia Water Department and Partnership with the Delaware Estuary received a Targeted Watershed Initiative grant from EPA, and that was really the shot in the arm that we did to roll out these work groups and to get people working towards projects to improve the impairments that were identified through our assessment process. So this here lays out ballparks of how much money has been spent in the watershed. I would guess that this number is there's probably more money that has been spent in the watershed than what's represented on this slide, but this was some facts and figures that we were breaking down to show how each work group and the areas identified in our assessment and protection plan, how money and funding has been directed towards those efforts in the past decade. Next. I mentioned earlier that Philadelphia has regulatory driver to working in watershed towards watershed protection. We are in bin 2 for as a result of our round 1 cryptosporidium monitoring along the Schuylkill. One of our drinking water treatment plants was 0.01 oocyst over, so 0.076, which prompted us to make modifications at the drinking water plants, along with doing a watershed control plan. Now, to my knowledge, I think that Philadelphia, along with only 3 other utilities in the country, and I could be wrong, I'd love to learn more if people have more knowledge of other systems doing watershed control plans. We're one of 4 that has a watershed control plan for a watershed that is mostly out of our control. So we use and the Schuylkill Partnership to be a vehicle for implementation for us to address the issues that we identified as priority concerns at causing cryptosporidium to be elevated in the Schuylkill River watershed. We identified through our watershed control plan that agriculture, geese, upstream inputs such as wastewater treatment could be influencing the cryptosporidium levels in the watershed. So using the Schuylkill Action Network and specifically the Schuylkill River Restoration Fund, we were able to direct Philadelphia Water Department resources to be leveraged with resources from other groups such as local conservation districts, local watershed organizations and planning groups upstream to tackle some of these challenges that can present elevated levels of pathogens in the watershed. So this photo here is a farm that we put some resources towards a couple years ago. You can see in the top slide that the stormwater was not being managed on site. There was a number of cows that were making their way through this area on a daily basis. The manure and nutrients and the other concerns associated with agriculture runoff were making their way into the Schuylkill River. After receiving money through the restoration fund, this farmer was able to implement a manure storage basin, also putting riparian buffers and stormwater controls on their farm. So the farmer wins. The farmer has a land area that's managed, and his cows are happier, and the water supplier and the community also benefits from this because the streams are clean, and it's helping Philadelphia achieve our credit towards our watershed control plan. Next. So in summary, before I hand it over to Tim, Philadelphia has very little control over its source water and is committed to addressing concerns facing our water supply through regional partnerships, and that by leveraging public-private resources, priority watershed protection projects can be accomplished to better protect a region's drinking water supply. Next. And with that being said, I'm going to hand the wheel over to Tim, who's going to speak about the Restoration Fund, which is the vehicle Philadelphia utilizes to implement projects upstream. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me be a part of your webinar here. Kelly's done a great job of giving some background to the watershed, the Schuylkill River watershed, and a lot of the work that's been completed over the last 10 years or more. So I'm going to give you the information on the Schuylkill River Restoration Fund, which Kelly mentioned several times in her presentation. It is a grant program designed to support restoration projects within the watershed. So next slide, please. So the program got its beginnings in 2005 and 2006. The Exelon Nuclear Corporation has a nuclear generating station on the banks of the Schuylkill River, just south of Pottstown. And this generating station uses water from the river for the operation of its plant. And in 2005, through a docket of the Delaware River Basin Commission, who has oversight over the entire Delaware River Basin water usage, through this docket, a pilot program was created that in essence was where the Restoration Fund got its start. And this docket in partnership had Exelon Nuclear returning a portion of what the water usage that they were using for the Limerick generating station back into a grant program. And so DRBC and Exelon approached the Schuylkill River Heritage Area, who had a long history of grant making and grant program administration. So they approached us, and we were brought into the picture to start setting up the program back in 2005. So the Restoration Fund, the program was designed to undertake implementation projects to improve both the quality and quantity of water within the Schuylkill River. And Exelon made the first contribution to the program in January of 2006. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through this slide, and this slide shows the four pillars, the four things that really have created a successful grant-making program and have really had an impact on the watershed. And the first thing is that of partnership. The Restoration Fund is a really unique way where both private and public partners come together, funding not only resources, but time and expertise to make the grant program the success that it's been. The Schuylkill River Heritage Area did not have the technical assistance through any of their staff to receive and vet the applications that we knew we were going to be receiving. So we put together an advisory team, and the advisory team was made up of staff and employees from various different local partners, including Exelon themselves and DRBC, the Philadelphia Water Department, Pennsylvania DEP, Region 3 of EPA, the Schuylkill Action Network, the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary, as well as the Heritage Area. And this advisory committee sets the program guidelines. They are the team that reviews all the grant applications and also is the one that determines the awards for each grant cycle. So that committee has been in place since early 2006. The funding has been significant in the first 12 years of the program. We are at about $2.9 million in contributions. That is made up of about $2.2 million coming from Exelon from 2006 to present. In 2010, the Philadelphia Water Department joined as a funder, and they have contributed $700,000 since 2010 to the program. And we've also received funding from other organizations like the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary, Aqua Pennsylvania, and the Coca-Cola Company. The program has a required match of only 25%. That can be both cash and in kind. But we've actually leveraged over $4.7 million to the 2.9 that has been contributed by program funders. So you can see that the program is over matching the requirements of the program, but also beyond a dollar-for-dollar match, which says a lot about the partnerships and the value that local partners see that this program brings to the watershed. And then you can see there the progress that the program has made. Over 82 projects have been awarded, 59 have been completed to date, with many of the balance of those still being in process. We've protected over 7,000 feet of stream bank. We've funded 22 farm restoration projects. We've done a lot of stormwater basin retrofits. Kelly mentioned the upper part of the watershed being heavily impacted by mining practices. We've done 6 AMD projects. And several years ago, we started a land transaction program which helps provide costs to land trusts and other organizations, nonprofits that work to conserve property. And we've conserved over 1,200 acres of property through funding from the Restoration Fund. So looking towards the future, the goal for the program has always been to have a sustainable amount of about $500,000 per year to go towards projects. We have not hit that goal yet, so we're still looking to raise funds to do that. We currently see about $250,000, give or take, each year that goes towards funding, but the goal is to have $500,000 annually to go towards applications and projects in the watershed. And then we will continue to implement the BMPs throughout the watershed through this mechanism. Next slide, please. So the strengths of the Schuylkill Restoration Fund are that we do have a diversified funding portfolio at this point. With, as I said, there's been 5 funders in the first 12 years of the program. We have a strong prioritization of the projects that we want to fund. The focus of the project since its inception has been on bricks and mortar and in-the-ground projects. It's been a very strong and very well-focused priority for the advisory team. They've done very well at sort of keeping that as their focus and knowing what kind of projects we think will have the biggest impact on the watershed. And we've continued to hold that as one of the core tenets of the program. Funding is acquired by the local partners, not only the Schuylkill River Heritage Area, the Schuylkill Action Network, and the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary are 3 of the folks that are nonprofit organizations on the advisory team that have the ability to go out and continue to search for new funding. The network, as I already mentioned, provides strong leverage to the funding that the current funders bring to the table. And after 12 or 13 years, both the Schuylkill River Heritage Area and the Schuylkill Action Network are very well known with local funders, both private and public. Next slide, please. Some of the challenges that we face is it's a pretty large watershed. Kelly gave you a good overview of what the watershed looks like, but it's a very diverse landscape from the city of Philadelphia in an urban setting all the way through pretty significant agricultural land all the way up to Schuylkill County in the northern parts of the watershed. Very diverse landscape with a diverse set of issues with diverse partnerships. So at times that can be a strength, and other times that does provide challenges. So far, as I mentioned, one of the good things about the program is that we do primarily fund bricks and mortar projects, but we have been approached over the years by different groups, watershed organizations, and applicants inquiring as to the possibility for planning projects that need to happen and some other outside-of-the-box projects that require funding and are in need of funding. So that is one of the things that we need to continue to do, is to look for new ways to fund some of those things that the program doesn't currently fund. I mentioned our goal to have a sustainable $500,000 pool of funds to work with. We continue to work with local partners and through the advisory team to reach that goal. And we not only do we need funding for projects, but we also need financing for operations, not only of the Schuylkill River Heritage Area staff, but ongoing partnerships like the Schuylkill Action Network and the work that other partners are doing to continue to see this work be a success in the watershed. Next slide, please. Some of the best practices of the program. One is collaboration. As I mentioned several times, the partnerships here in southeastern Pennsylvania and within the Schuylkill River watershed itself, partnerships are very strong. There's a lot of players at the table, and the strong level of partnerships basically makes each of the individual organizations stronger than they are. The more attention that's brought to the resource and the more attention that is communicated, the needs that are a part of the watershed, the better it is for each of the agencies and organizations involved in the project. The prioritization of projects is extremely successful, as I mentioned. The program has supported lots of different projects that have had a direct impact on the watershed. The prioritization of making logical investments from our funders. We don't take for granted that some of these funders have come back year after year and continue to support the program. And so the advisory committee has been very diligent in wanting to make the best use of those dollars and invest them into projects that we know will have a direct impact on the watershed and the river itself. And we understand the need. There is great need still within the river and the watershed for continued work. And each year the advisory committee tries to lay out guidelines and support projects that will meet the priorities that face the watershed. Next slide, please. Evaluation is something that we continue to try to work at what we do. This is something that we can do better at, for sure. We haven't invested money into monitoring yet, but there are other partners in the watershed, other funders, private foundations that have begun to put money into the monitoring of some of the projects that we've invested in and other projects that are being installed on the ground. And so that is one area for the future that we continue to hope to improve on, that will give us feedback and more data as to the impact of the projects that we're completing. And then, of course, there's always time for celebration. One of the things that we do through the Schuylkill River Restoration Fund is each year we have an annual press event, and we typically hold that at one of the sites where a project has been completed through the Restoration Fund. This is a great time to share with the success that some of the projects have had, not only share with landowners and farmers and communities and townships, but also with the folks who are involved in completing the projects, watershed groups, and it's a wonderful way to bring awareness to the program and to the watershed itself. So we've had a lot of success with that as well. Next slide, please. Future of the Schuylkill River funding, we continue to look towards other places like water suppliers and private businesses that are water users throughout the watershed and along the river. There is a real need for more support, as I've mentioned. Each year we turn down projects. We have more projects that are submitted to the grant program than we can fund. So we continue to seek new ways that we can bring funders to the table. There's also some additional funding. Local Berks Watershed Fund. There's AMD funding that the folks in Schuylkill County have access to. We continue to just try to raise awareness to all of the funding mechanisms and all the resources that are available to go into projects in the Schuylkill River. And we have to continue to work at a consistent messaging plan. It's important that we make our messaging clear, and we've been able to do that as a group of partners, not only through a lot of the work that the Schuylkill Action Network is doing, and then also through the funding of the projects through the Restoration Fund. And then, as I mentioned previously, we continue to try to find ways to think outside of the box, to explore new opportunities, not only for funding, but also knowing the projects that need support, how we can get those projects completed. And then I'm going to end my presentation, next slide please, with some, okay, those are some additional partnerships we have. There's a local microbrewery called Saucony Creek Brewing Company. They're in the watershed, and they return a portion of the proceeds of one of their drinks, the Stonefly IPA. They return that to the Schuylkill Action Network, and that funding gets invested into staff and projects within the watershed. So that's just one example of some unique sort of outside of the box ways that we've been able to bring some more funding and more attention to the Schuylkill River as a resource for drinking water. Next slide, please. The last couple slides here, just going to show you some project photographs. This was an abandoned mine drainage project in Schuylkill County. A lot of the history of that area, there's the largest deposit of anthracite coal in the world in Schuylkill County, and the effects of that mining that occurred 100 years ago or more is impacting the water in the river to this day. And so you can see there's a borehole coming out of one of the mines, heavily laden with metals. And we've supported several projects that create settling ponds and introduce limestone into the system as a way to filter out some of the metals before they enter the main Schuylkill River. Next slide, please. And then we've done, as I mentioned on the earlier slide, we've funded over 22 projects that do work on the agricultural farms of Berks County. One of the things that is being done quite a bit is implementing a manure storage facility, which is the picture on the right there. This allows farmers to remove manure from not only their barns and their milk houses and their barnyards, and get it into this concrete facility, which removes stormwater issues, but it also allows farmers to distribute the manure onto their fields in the most timely way, not only for their crops, but also in a way that will reduce that sediment and entering into the river. We've done many stormwater basin retrofits. The picture on the left is one that was done in Montgomery County several years ago. Next slide, please. And with Philadelphia Water Department bringing their funding to the table in 2010, we've been able to work with a lot of schools in the city of Philadelphia. This is a project that was done at the Albert Greenfield School, which was a really great project. They removed a lot of the impervious surface on a parking lot and a playground, and they were able to retrofit the playground with porous surface products and French drains and stormwater gardens and all those sorts of things. We've done several projects like that in Philadelphia that have been just a great project, not only for learning and education, but also for a great way to bring in the communities and the students and the teachers and the staff and parents to educate them on the value of the Schuylkill River and what that resource brings to them. Next slide, please. So that's the end of my presentation. Like has been mentioned before, I know there's going to be a time for questions here, so I'd be certainly willing to field any questions you might have, and my contact information is there if you'd like to contact me after the webinar. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly and Tim. That concludes our panel presentations for today. And thank you to all of the panelists. We now have time for questions, and please remember to type your questions into the question box. We'll go ahead and start. We've had a few questions come in during the course of the presentations, and I will go ahead and start with those. The first is for Les, and I'm going to combine the two questions together. One is a request for a clarification on whether the price of water in the Hood River for Hood River farmers is $100 per acre or $100 per acre foot. And the other is what is the mechanism for the on-farm water savings as opposed to the savings for the water efficiencies in the delivery of water?
Sure. So that is a per acre, not a per acre foot. So it's actually $110 per acre, which is high. You can see in Oregon it ranges from $5 an acre to $150 an acre. So we're at the higher end. In terms of the on-farm efficiencies, we have funded that ourselves to a certain extent. We actually fund micro sprinklers for our growers. We've also partnered with NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, utilizing their funding programs, typically EQIP, and then our Watershed Council as well. And then we typically are matching 50-50 for the growers. So if they want to convert to a micro system or a more efficient irrigation system, they typically need to come up with 50% of the cost, and then we use grant funds to fund the other 50%. And so that typically we've used a different funding source for the on-farm side. And the on-farm side is a slower process. We're about 95% converted in our district. The other districts in our basin range from 20% converted to 50% converted. So we've invested heavily on the on-farm side out of our own funds, and then we utilize DEQs, WSRF funding, typically for our large pipe projects, which tend to last for pipe we're putting in the ground now will last at least 100 years. So they're longer-term, big infrastructure investments.
Okay. Thank you, Les. We have a question for Kelly.
Okay, great.
Pushback on using public, okay, have you had pushback on using public monies for private properties?
That's a great question. So we're very careful about where we fund our projects upstream. We want to make sure that for every dollar that PWD is putting into the pot, we are getting at least $3 back. So for every 25 cents we spend, we're making 75 cents. We're getting 75 cents returned on the investment. Part of the beauty of working through the Schuylkill Action Network and through the Restoration Fund is that we have the opportunity to select from a wide range of projects, and we often look for projects that are achieving triple bottom line results. So that includes working with schools. As Tim mentioned, we had a project on the schools in Philly. For the projects that we fund upstream, those projects have to directly link to our watershed control plan. So doing stormwater management and manure management on farms is a regulatory driver that PWD works through as a vehicle for implementation for projects upstream. Yes, every year is a challenge, and you know, like we work off of we are a public utility, and we're funded through our ratepayers. So every year is a challenge for us to have to convince folks that this is worthwhile. But when you see the types of improvements that we've been seeing, and the partnerships and the relationships that have been established with the upstream communities and the region, it's really a win-win for everybody. It's a win for the water supplier, it's a win for the students and for the children that have these types of projects on their property, it's a win for the farmer, their land is being better managed, and it's a win for the watershed.
Thank you, Kelly. Let's see. There's a question for Tim. Let's see. How is the SAN operated, and is there full-time staff that manages the funds?
First, the second question first. There is full-time staff within the Schuylkill River Heritage Area. We have a staff of 6 full-time employees. Thanks to our funders, both Exelon and Philadelphia Water Department, they allow the Schuylkill River Heritage Area to take 10% of their annual contributions to put towards the oversight, administration, and management of the grant program. So the funds that we are able to use from their contributions help support the staff that oversees and manages the grant program. In the Schuylkill Action Network, it has 2 employees, both through the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary. The SAN is not a 501c3 in and of itself, but they function through the Partnership of the Delaware Estuary. and both of those employees, there's 2 employees on the PDE staff that work primarily in the Schuylkill River watershed and as a part of leadership for the Schuylkill Action Network.
Okay, thank you, Tim. See, please keep your questions coming. And in the meantime, I do have a question. This is for each of the panelists. I was wondering, for a brand new coalition that is just getting started, very short, what advice would you give them? Carrie, shall we start with you?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Okay, for a brand new source water coalition that is just starting out, what advice would you give them about seeking funding?
I would recommend that they get in touch with their state revolving fund folks, either on the drinking water or the clean water side, just to start the communication with them in case there's any future opportunities to get funding from them.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. Les? Yeah, newbies just starting. What advice would you give them about finding funding?
I would say, first of all, have a big tent. Our basin's done a great job of pulling in all kinds of different folks to make sure that we're getting all the perspectives met. And then really looking at your grant fund versus loan fund, what that makeup needs to be, what kind of long-term funding you have available to pay for debt. So just really analyzing all those different pieces, because different funding obviously fits different scenarios when you're working in a big watershed.
Thank you. Kelly and Tim.
Sure. I think knowing the group that you're working with in your watershed, we've been, through our assessments, we really got to learn the farmers and learn from the mining community and learn from the folks in our suburbs what they're, how they work, and having local on-the-ground folks to help make those connections in with the farming community, in with the mining community, in with the suburban community, and with the city of Philadelphia has been key. So having the leadership from the Schuylkill Action Network through the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary, and also having committed staff from EPA Region 3, Pennsylvania DEP, DRBC, and Philadelphia Water that continually meet on a monthly basis to talk about the planning priorities, I think that's key, is keeping that momentum moving and staying connected to each other, understanding and being open about the challenges of funding these types of partnerships, and just just working together has really been is really the most important piece of this. And water speaks to people. Water is something that if you have the right person delivering the message about the challenges and things associated with watershed protection and water quality in the rivers and streams and connecting it to drinking water, it's something that the average person and people that aren't scientists and engineers like us really connect with. So having proactive messaging and being able to explain in layman's terms what we're doing and why it benefits them, I think is very important.
Thank you,
yeah,
Kelly.
Kelly just hit on what I was going to say. I think you really have to have a very clear understanding, and you have to be able to communicate clearly to funders what value you're going to be bringing to their involvement in your program. So you need to be able to articulate that well and be able to communicate what exactly the value is going to be for the program. And then just like anything, it takes a village to get it done. We certainly do not do it by ourselves, even though we have sort of the daily oversight of the program. We lean heavily on the partners that are on that advisory team for counsel and for guidance and for understanding sort of the larger things that are happening within the watershed that they understand much better than we do. So that's what I would say.
Okay, thank you so much. This is hopefully one last question and relatively quick before we close. It's a question on whether or not the staff at the Schuylkill River Restoration Fund would be open to visiting municipalities upstream.
Oh, sure, absolutely. We'd be more than happy to do that. We'd love that opportunity to get word out on the program, to communicate how our funding and the funding that comes to the program can continue to work at the ongoing issues within the watershed. We certainly would be willing to do that.
Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid we're just about out of time. It looks like we only have a minute or so. So I wanted to thank all of the panelists yet again. We really, really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise with us today, and also to thank all of the participants on the webinar today. Let's see, next slide please, Bo. Yeah, upcoming events. As we said at the beginning, the Learning Exchange and the Source Water Collaborative are much more than this webinar series. Please watch for the December webinar on source water protection messaging. The date has not yet been determined, but please watch for the announcement. Also, you can find out more about each of our presenters and their organizations from their website. Their websites are posted here. And this webinar will be posted to the Learning Exchange here in about a week or so. So thank you, everyone, and I think it is time. So we are adjourned. Take care.